Okay, hello and welcome to the MSDynamicsWorld.com Spring 2014 Financial Automation Webcast Series. I'm Jason Gumpert, and joining us for today's event is Pam Miller, a writer, educator, and consultant with many years of experience on a variety of topics related to accounts payable and business management. She's here today to talk about getting your AP project off the ground. And as we get started, I just wanted to add that this is the second to last session in our Financial Automation series. The next event is our Financial Automation Shootout on Friday, June 20th at 12 p.m. It will feature a look at solutions from our 4 series sponsors and a chance for the audience to ask any questions they might have about those different kinds of solutions. So just look for the live events link in the upper right area of our site to find that session and sign up. So without further delay, I'm going to hand it off to Pam Miller now, and I just want to add that you can ask your questions throughout the session using the Q&A or chat blocks that you will see on the right side of the screen. Let me please give control and welcome Pam Miller. Pam, are you there?
Yes, thank you. As Jason said, I have been working with IOFM, the Institute of Finance and Management, doing a lot of writing and educating about AP. I am, however, an AP practitioner, was for many years at a intermediate-sized lumber company located in Boise, Idaho. We were quite busy in our AP department. We did anywhere from 550 to 660,000 invoices a year, depending on what year it was. And we were early adopters of automation. So I have kind of lived the information that's in these slides. So I'm hoping that what I share will be interesting and useful to you. And as you said, you can ask questions. We'll save some time for questions at the end. I also have my contact information on the last slide, so you can contact me later on if you don't think of a question till later, and I'll be happy to respond. I want to talk first a little bit about accounts payable and how we're viewed in most of our organizations. And quite simply, that is as we pay the bills. But for those of us inside AP, we realize that we do a lot more than that, right? We really know what's going on in our organization. We own and control massive quantities of strategic data because we know what we've bought, when we've bought it, who we've paid, all those kinds of things. We also have the power to improve or destroy relationships with our vendors, with our suppliers. Generally, we want to improve those relationships. Cost containment and cash management, those are at the top of our executive agendas, and that's really in our sweet spot, right? Because we have the power to add or subtract from the bottom line when we think about things like cash flow, discounts, interest fees, those kinds of things. AP has a large responsibility in terms of protecting the organization from penalties and fines, things like sales and use tax enforcement, unclaimed property, 1099, right? And when you think about AP this way, and if you can spread the word about AP, framing it this way instead of as we just pay the bills, then you're more likely to get people, particularly executives, to be interested in wanting to help AP do a better job. And that's the first step towards getting what we need in terms of automating AP. Because in general, automation technology, particularly for AP, is considered to be just flat too expensive, right? Particularly in smaller companies. Large companies are more likely to automate, but one of the reasons that it's a barrier, an obstacle for us, is quite simply how much it costs. And small companies, large companies, everybody has budget constraints to some degree or another. And let's face it, quite frankly, funds go to snazzier projects, right? The hot areas, the customer-facing areas. We're back office, so we're just not considered cool enough, right, to get the money that we need to automate. And bills are getting paid, right? If it's not broke, don't fix it. Why should executives invest some of their meager cash for automating in AP when the bills are getting paid? So it's up to us to kind of change their point of view and realize that it's important for them to contribute to the growth of AP and the improvement in AP. In addition to those issues, we have some issues that are kind of self-defeating, where we shoot ourselves in the foot. Right, we tend to be a little bit wary of change and unwilling to change. And we really need to get out of that mindset and consider how important change is and how it can improve the area of AP and improve our performance. Part of the problem I think we have, in addition to being wary of change, is that it's hard, right? It's hard to figure out what technology do I want to implement. And once I've decided on that technology, which vendor is the right one? And then you start thinking about implementing the project, right? It can be very complicated. and we need IT help. We need all kinds of things to get it done, and it can just seem overwhelming at times. So again, we need to kind of look at this with a new point of view and figure out how we're going to get through some of these obstacles so that we really can move on and do an automation project. So let's talk about how we're going to do this, what the plan is to get this thing off the ground, to get going. The very first thing we're going to talk about is assessing where we're going, where we are today, so that we can figure out where we want to be. So these are the topics that we're going to spend a few minutes on now. Assessing. We do a lot of surveys at IOFM, and one of the things that consistently amazes me is how few AP managers and directors really know what it costs for them to run AP. Yeah, they probably know what their budget is for people, that kind of thing. But when you really ask them, right, how much does it cost for you to process an invoice? How much does it cost you to process a payment? They don't really know. You need to have this kind of information at your fingertips, right? You need to understand the facts and figures and what your costs are to help you determine the right project, to help you prioritize those projects, and to build the business case so you can get the funding that you need. So if you're not keeping statistics now, if you haven't taken some time to create a statistics kind of dashboard or really look at what you're doing, this is the time to start, right? You need that information so that you can move forward. One little caveat there, though, is you don't want to count just the things that are easy to count. You really need to think about what kinds of things it is that you're counting, what kind of metrics that you're keeping to make sure that they're really getting to the point of how your department is running and how you might see room for improvement. So let's take a little bit of a walk through the kinds of things that you might want to think about in terms of statistics and numbers when you're looking at an automation project. First off is let's think about how many invoices do we receive? What kind of invoices are they? Are they invoices for expense type things, inventory type things, T&E, right? What kind of invoices are they? Where do they come from? Do they come from other departments? Do they come directly from the vendors? How do they get to you? Do they come by mail? Most of us get an awful lot of mail, but we also maybe get faxes. Maybe we get invoices as PDFs attached to emails, right? How do they get there? On the payment side, how many payments are you sending out? And what kind of payments are they, right? Are they all going out by check? Are you doing a little bit of ACH? Are you doing some wiring? And let's talk about what our turnaround time is, right? If you're going to try to make one of the benefits of automating that you're going to be able to have a quicker turnaround time, you need to know what your turnaround time is. You need to understand discounts. How many discounts are you taking? How many are you missing? Are you paying late fees, right? All of these things kind of wend their way into the business case that we're going to need to build for what kind of improvements we're going to obtain when we automate AP. We also really need to understand our processes. I think one of the best pieces of advice in terms of updating or automating our system is understanding the process as it is currently right now, right? We really need to map them out. Whether you do that on a whiteboard, whether you do it on a big piece of paper, Post-it notes all around the room, however you do it, you really need to map your processes out. And as you do that, you need to think about why do you do some of the things you do, right? Can we eliminate some of the steps or processes? Some of the things we're doing may not really have any value anymore. We tend to do a lot of things in AP because we've always done them, right? We've inherited some processes. We really need to sit down and look, preferably as a group, the whole AP department, and try to figure it out, what we do, why we do it, and if there's benefit to doing it that way. We might want to think also, should we do some things differently? Should some things be done elsewhere? Maybe some things that we do in AP would be better off done in the tax department or the accounting department or in treasury, or maybe the inverse of that. Maybe some things that are done in treasury or the accounting department should be done in AP. Right? We need to collaborate with these people when we're thinking about automating so that we can determine what the best solution is and how we might involve them in the process, because that's important too. We need to, as we're doing this, really get rid of what I call the blame game, right? A lot of times we're doing some processes that particularly that involve other departments that we think other departments are making us do that kind of thing. We need to let go of those, right? We want to move forward and forget the kinds of things that are taking us down and dragging us behind and causing friction between us and other departments. Once we've kind of got our processes down and our statistics down, right, what it is we're doing and how we're doing it, we really need to start thinking about what kind of automation choices are out there. Because there's really lots of technology choices that are directed towards AP. Many of them focus on what I call the incoming side, right? Invoice coming in, how we're going to automate the income, the invoice receipt and posting process, right? And these technologies tend to focus around decreasing data entry and increasing efficiency. But we want to think about the payment side too. Maybe your first automation project will be something like moving to ACH, right? Automating the payment side. Most of these technologies that are available to us in AP now are mature or maturing, which means they're safe. We implemented imaging and workflow in 1994. That was a little bit ahead of our time. But now if you're looking at some of these technologies, they've been around for a long time. They've proven their value, right? So you know that they're safe. The risk is going to be less than it might have been a while back. But still, you want to be sure that if somebody really comes to you with something that's new and cool, that you carefully assess the risks that are involved. I think the major challenge is figuring out what the right tool is, the right mix, the right vendor. Because you really need to make sure that you get a good fit to your processes, including whatever automation you have already. You want to make sure you get a good fit to your culture, because any automation project is going to involve change. And you want to think about your vendor population as well, because some technologies require them to make significant changes while others don't. And you need to understand what you're going to be asking of your vendors. And of course, we always need to think about what our budget is likely to be, both in times of dollars and IT availability, right? Those are some of our main constraints, is the budget and IT availability, easy for me to say. So we want to take that in consideration as we consider what technology is the right fit for us. And we need to think about that there probably isn't one overarching technology that's going to be right for us. And also what's right for another organization might not be right for us either, right? We need to find the one that's right for us. We might need to implement multiple technologies, right? We might add ACH and imaging and automated T&E. Maybe some other combination of technologies are the right one for us. Every department is individual, and we need to keep that in mind. So let's talk for a few minutes about what types of technology are available to us in AP. I'm going to run through a little bit of thought process as we look at some of these that are the most common that are available to us. So first, let's talk about imaging, OCR, and workflow. And here we really want to think about how many paper invoices we receive. In the last survey that we did on AP, we found that in general, in our respondents, still about 83% of the invoices they receive are paper. So when we're thinking about imaging, we're thinking about getting rid of paper. So it's really kind of the sweet spot there. When we're thinking about imaging, we need to think about how they're getting to us. We need to think about the quality of the paper, right? What does it look like? How easy is it going to be to scan? We need to think about, do we just need header information for our process? Or do we need header information and line information as well? Because if we need all of the line information as well, we might want to look at OCR. That might be important to us to eliminate a lot of data entry. If it's just header information that we need, then perhaps we can implement imaging, and maybe we'll do OCR later. Workflow. How many people and departments touch your invoices? Are approvals a real headache for you? Workflow can really be the solution here, because we can scan the invoice, we can do a little bit of preliminary work there and put that invoice into the workflow for the approval process. Makes that process much smoother than doing it manually. Technological expertise of your vendor population, putting imaging, OCR, and workflow in place pretty much doesn't mean your vendors are going to have to change very much. If you're going to outsource some of the imaging and data extraction, then maybe you're going to be asking them to send their invoices to a new PO box. But other than that, there's really not very much you're going to have to ask of your vendors. So if you have a not sophisticated vendor population, this might be the answer for you. And you need to think about what your organization's view on software as a service or hosted solutions are. Let's talk about EDI or e-invoicing or electronic invoice presentment. All right, EDI is always the next big thing. It's always what we want to do because essentially it gets rid of the paper, right? The computers are just going to talk to each other. It can be somewhat complex to implement. And again, we need to think about, how many invoices do we get? How do they get to us? In addition, we need to think about data instead of paper, right? This is a cultural change for us. If all of our invoices are going to come in electronically now, We're not going to have that invoice copy to do whatever it is that we do, write notes on it or that kind of thing. And we really need to think when we're talking about EDI or e-invoicing about the technological expertise of our vendor population, because these solutions require major changes on their part. And because of that, it's really important when we're looking at these kinds of solutions to think about our vendor that we're likely to choose, right? How easy do they make it for our vendors? What kind of resources are they going to provide to help us train our vendors in how to use this new technology? Really critical when we're talking e-invoicing. And again, what type of IT resources are available to you? Right? What's going to be available to help you implement these types of things? And what's your organization's view on software as a service or hosting? Evaluated receipt settlement is another automated solution that a lot of people look at. You may not think of it as really being automated, but one of the things it does is eliminate the invoice, because if you implement ERS, you're essentially going to be matching the receiving document to the purchase order. And when you're looking at ERS, you really need to think about what kinds of invoices do you get. You have contracts for purchasing certain items. What's your relationship with purchasing and receiving? If you're not going to get an invoice to verify your pricing, you need to make sure that your purchasing department is really on board keeping the prices up to date, and they have really cooperative vendors, right, who are always going to do things correctly, not those guys who always send you invoices with lots of errors. You need to understand in terms of receiving how reliable they are and how quick they are to receive, because if you're going to be paying your bills based on what the quantity is that receiving said you received, you need to make sure that they're really reliable. And again, what's your vendor population like? If you've got some really good vendors, they're under contract, they always perform well, then they may be suitable candidates for adding ERS. You really need to consider, if you're adding something like this, what your relationship is with your vendor's AR departments as well. A lot of things to keep in mind with ERS. Automated expense reporting, I think, is probably one of the earliest and most successful automation technologies that AP folks have added. It's been around for a long time, and it's really one that a lot of people add on probably as one of their first automation projects. And it really does well in organizations where there are a lot of expense reports, right? If you only do 5 or 6 expense reports a month, this may not be the place for you to start. But if you have a lot of expense reports, a lot of expense filers who are always on the road and really benefit from being able to file their expenses online, is really a solution that you might want to look at. If you have a travel department or preferred vendors, again, automated expense reporting really links with those and really provides you a lot of information. And you need to think, too, if you're thinking about automated expense reporting, if you have a card program in place, and what level of support for policies and procedures your executive group provides, right? Because this is another area where you're going to automate some of your policies and procedures, and you really need to think about how you're going to go about that and what kind of support you're going to have as you go through the implementation process. And this type of process in particular, automated expense reporting, is one that's going to affect your executive group as well. So you really need to be thinking about that. And again, what's your organization's view on hosting? I mentioned that we're talking also about automating the payment side of things. ACH stands for Automated Clearinghouse. And that's where we're going to essentially direct deposit our payments to our vendors, right? We're going to eliminate the check. If this is the technology that you want to implement, you need to think about your payment side, right? How often do you cut checks? How many checks? How many invoices are on each of those checks? And how much does it cost you, not only to produce the check, but mail the check? And what type of population, right? Your vendor population, that's always something you need to keep in mind. If you're going to start sending them electronic payments, are they going to be conducive to accepting them that way or not, right? Something that you need to consider. You also need to consider, if you're looking at ACH, what your finance or treasury department's view is on cash management, particularly float, right? You're going to lose that mail float if you're paying electronically, and how are you going to deal with that? And you need to understand who manages the banking relationship. Usually that's not us in AP. So if we're going to implement ACH, we're going to need to partner with whoever that group is who manages that bank relationship, right? Some new things to keep in mind. Purchasing card program, you may not think about that as an automation project, but in reality it is. Not only do you get the plastic card, but that plastic card is really a technology tool, because along with that, you get the ability to use usually an online reconciliation tool that will let you manage the transactions that people are putting on their cards, and hopefully upload all of those transactions into your system. Even when you're looking at purchasing cards, give it a lot of thought as well. You need to think about what types of invoices that you are receiving. Are they mostly for expense type items or for inventory type items? Cards generally work better with expense items rather than inventory. You need to think about expense reports as well. Are you going to move expense reports onto a purchasing card program, or are you going to have two card programs? Are you going to do the automated expense reporting? You need to think about that if you're going to add a purchasing card as well. And again, think about your checks. You're going to cut far fewer checks if you add a purchasing card program. You need to think also about how big your transactions are, right? Are most of your invoices for low dollar amounts? For most of us it is. If you do some research and look at the size of your invoices that you're paying, you find a lot of them are relatively low dollar. And purchasing cards are really ideal for managing low dollar invoices. They essentially get a lot of those invoices out of AP, right? Eliminate the paper, eliminate the transactions pretty much, because the people who are using the purchasing cards will now be doing the purchasing and the settlement, right? They'll be doing the paying as well. Really need to consider your vendor population here too, because a lot of vendors are just flat reluctant to accept a purchasing card. So the success of your purchasing card program and how many transactions you get out of AP, how much paper you get out of AP, is likely to be dependent on that vendor population. So it's really critical that you think about that. And you really need to think too about how your executives view a card program. Some of them are very pro card programs. Some of them are very anti because they're concerned about misuse of the program. Really need to think about it as a cultural thing, what it's going to be like culturally. Once you've kind of zoomed in on what type of technology it is that you want to implement, you need to think about the delivery. And you notice that I asked at the bottom of each of those slides about the technology is what your organization's view is on software as a service or hosting. It used to be if we wanted to automate AP that we had to buy and maintain software, right? Big commitment up front in terms of dollars, big commitment from the IT department usually because they're the ones who are going to implement and maintain it, right? But now we can do so many things. Just about any AP automation technology is available as software as a service or hosting. And the benefits of that are, first of all, low upfront costs, right? We don't have the huge commitment to buy the software and buy the servers that it's going to run on. We pretty much are going to establish a payment methodology where we're going to pay as we go. We're going to pay for what we use, whether it's by transactions, storage, capabilities, those kinds of things. Essentially, we're going to pay for what we're using. Generally, software as a service is easier and faster and cheaper to implement, right? Because we're not buying and configuring all of those servers and putting the software on it. We're also going to have less reliance on internal IT because the software vendor is essentially going to become our software, our IT department, right? They're going to be our first line of defense whenever we have some type of a problem with our software. Another thing to consider when we're considering software as a service is, in general, software as a service is going to be an operating budget type item where buying and maintaining software, that purchase of that software and those servers is going to be a capital expenditure. But we really need to understand your organization and particularly your IT department's view on this type of software before you go there. Right? Some IT departments are really gung-ho. They've already implemented one or more types of solutions this way. Some of them are really concerned about it because of control issues. I think fortunately, as more and more software as a service and hosted solutions have gone out there, more and more organizations have grasped what a benefit they are. And the whole thing makes it much easier for us in AP to be able to automate our departments because we can do it with less IT involvement and we can do it with less upfront expense. So it's a real bonus for us. Another problem we have in terms of figuring out how we're going to go about this is what vendor we're going to choose, right? We might have figured out what technology we want to use. We may have figured out that we want to do it hosted or we're going to buy it. But now, where are we going to get it? There's so many vendors in the AP space, right? So many of them. And they all seem to be providing the same type of solution, right? There's 14, 15 vendors that you can talk to who do EDI. There's another 20 that do imaging, another 20 that do OCR, right? How do you pick who it is that you're going to work with? All right, well, one thing is you need to think about, what it is that you want from them. How big a commitment is it? How big a partnership is it going to be? excuse me, you're obviously going to look at the features that their software provides and the services they're going to provide. You also need to, I think, give some thought to what kind of staying power they're going to have, right? What vendor is going to be the last vendor standing? Because you know there's a lot of vendors out there. Some of them are going to buy other vendors, right? So that means some of them are going to be bought. And it's really a good idea to try to figure out who it is who's going to be the buyer. It's really difficult, I think, to hitch your wagon to a vendor and then have them be bought by someone else who wants to move you to their software or isn't going to support that software. Voice of experience there. Our imaging software was bought and sold a couple of times, and we had to make a lot of changes along the way. And this is something you really need to think about, and that kind of is going to maybe point you to some of the bigger vendors who've been around longer, but that proven track record, really important there. And it may be important to you that the vendor has experience in your industry. Some vendors kind of specialize. And sometimes it might be important to know that they specialize, because if you're not in that industry, right, you don't want to go with that vendor. You want to maybe go with a vendor who specializes in your industry or who has kind of a universal appeal, that kind of thing. Really need to understand if you're talking software as a service or hosted, data security issues, right, security, data integrity. And you need to think about what's going to happen if you leave that vendor, right? What's going to happen to my data? They're storing all the data on their servers. How am I going to get it back? You need to think about how the backup's going to be working, all those kinds of things. What's the interface going to be in terms of security, hackers, those kinds of things. And I think it's really important to meet more than the sales team, right? Sales teams are great, but they're not the guys you're going to be working with on a daily basis. You really need to meet the folks who are going to be your implementation team, the folks who are going to be your support team, right? Because you want to make sure that you're compatible with those people, because they're the ones you're going to have the long-term relationship with. You want to make sure you do the demo, and I always recommend do the demo with the invoices that you provide, right? These software vendors can do a perfect demo with the information that they have, but you want to give them your worst invoices, your biggest problems, those kinds of things, so that you can see how it's going to work in real life, right? These are my problem vendors, these are my problem invoices, these are my problem employees. Let's see how it works with some of them, right? Some real life material to do the demo with. You want to make sure you do the reference call. Yes, the people that they give you to call are going to be outstanding customers who are satisfied, but even those people will let you know what the difficulties were when they implemented, what some problems are, what types of changes to the software they'd like to see, right? They're going to give you overall a positive point of view, but most of them are going to be honest and tell you where the problems are, those kinds of things, and what they're hoping for in the future. And if you have the opportunity to do a site visit, all the better, right? It's really a good idea to see the software in action in a real live AP department. Now, we also need to focus on internal, right? We need to understand how the game is played in our own organization. We need to understand how we're going to get a project approved and implemented. We need to build the business case for our return on investment. That's what ROI stands for, right? Is there some type of a standard form or a formula that we need to use? In my organization, there was an ROI spreadsheet that I had to plug all of my numbers in whenever I was looking at a project, and that was the only prescribed way to come up with something that was considered a valid ROI calculation, right? Maybe your organization has the same type of thing. You need to know what kind of paperwork is required. Do I need to have an idea statement where I'm going to say, this is what I want to do and this is what I think it's going to accomplish? Do I need to do a request for information, an RFP or an RFQ, right? What kinds of paperwork is required in my organization in terms of a project approval and a project implementation? I need to understand, is there a different approval process for capital versus operating expense expenditure, right? Because if I'm going to buy and maintain, we're thinking capital, if we're going to be hosted or software as a service, it's more likely to be operated. I need to understand how budgets are prepared, right? The capital budget and how the operating budget is prepared. Who does it? When does it happen? Because I need to know so that I can get my project on the appropriate budget in the right time frame. I need to particularly know if I'm going to be needing capital budget funds if there are more hoops to jump through, and there very often are. If I'm going to be doing a capital project, I usually have to go before a special committee, a steering committee, something like that. Funding may only be granted once or twice a year for a capital project. Again, another reason that it's easier for us now that more and more AP technology is available as a hosted or software as a service option because that means we can bypass some of the capital budget rigmarole that we used to have to go through. Also need to think about prioritizing our projects, right? A lot of organizations have a list of projects, automation projects that they want to achieve. If that's the case, you need to figure out how do you get your project on that list, right? How do you get a priority assigned to it? Is there a list? Where is that list? Who controls it? How do I get on it? And we need to understand who the decision makers are and who we might be able to enlist on our side, right? Who we can get to sponsor our project, who we can get involved and excited that can work with us at the executive level to help us get the project going, to help us get the funding and the understanding that we need. And for the most part, when we do our surveys, 78% of AP departments report to the finance group, right? So CFO, that's likely where you want to look in that area, or maybe treasury, to find someone who's going to support you in implementing and getting the information out there that you need to get your project going. Generally, we need to try to feed the information that we need to paint the picture for our audience in a manner that they're going to understand. So it's really important, I think, to understand the objectives of the people that we're going to be seeking help from, right? Generally, our CFO cares about cutting costs. That's the guy that we report to. When we're talking to the CFO about our project, we probably want to emphasize the cost-cutting nature of the results of the project are going to be. CEO, he generally cares about increasing revenue. So if we're pitching to the CEO, we might want to put some emphasis on how we're going to be able to capture more discounts, or if we're implementing a P card, what the P card rebate is going to be, right? We really need to think about what's important to them, heighten the awareness of what the issues are in AP that are going to be resolved by our project, right, and really try to influence them in that way, right? Match the benefits of your solution to the interest and the priorities of the decision makers, right? Talk to them in their language. So let's talk about some of the benefits of automation, some of the things that we could use to sell our project. Let's talk about increased efficiency. What are we going to get out of increased efficiency? We're going to get things like lower headcount. And no matter who you're talking about, when you're talking about automating AP, you're probably going to be talking about lowering headcount, because that's kind of the equation that the decision makers are going to make, right? If I put the money into automating AP, then I surely should see lower headcount. Or if lower headcount is really something that you're trying to avoid, but you want to change some of the things that AP is doing, you need to make sure that you change that equation in their head to not necessarily going to lower headcount, but going to achieve more value out of my AP department. But increased efficiency can do other things as well, right? It's going to offer us the opportunity to capture more discounts, decrease the frequency of supply chain interruptions, right? Help us get rid of credit holds. And if that's an issue in your area, that's something that automation can really help you do away with. And of course, decrease the number of late fees or interest on late payments if your current manual process is really causing you to have to pay those kinds of things. Automation can help you make fewer errors, and not only can fewer errors lead to lower headcount, but it's going to keep the cash at home, right? Rather than paying the wrong invoice or an invoice twice and having to get that money back later, it's never going to be going out there, right? You're going to lower the amount that you're going to pay to post auditors. And also, again, decrease the frequency of supply chain interruptions, because the invoices are going to be paid to the right vendor more promptly. Streamline approval processes, right? We're talking workflow, we're talking about automating some of the steps that were involved in AP, can lead to lower headcount, not just in AP, but in other departments as well, and increased worker satisfaction, right? No longer are we nagging and having that back and forth. It's going to free up some time in those other departments, right, because the approvals are streamlined, for them to do more value-added work as well. Automation is also going to help us increase visibility into payables, right? We're going to know much quicker what kind of funds we owe, right? What the overall costs are for AP, how much we're going to need on the 10th of the month, on the 20th of the month, that kind of thing. It can help us improve cash flow. It can help us capture more prompt payment discounts, right? Those kinds of things. It can really help us provide Treasury with the information they need to more strategically plan the payments, those kinds of things. And the increased visibility into what's in payables, right? What's outstanding, what we're paying, who we're paying, that spend analysis type of information can help us eliminate some maverick spend, consolidate some of our spending, and really provide important information to the purchasing group as well. So there's a lot of benefits to automation that we can list right out, and we can talk about them to help us sell what it is that we're trying to do and focus in on what our approvers are interested in hearing in terms of what the benefits are going to be. Now, of course, it's not just benefits that we need to sell. We need to talk about money, right? How much is it going to cost us? What's our budget going to be? What's our ROI, right? How long is it going to take us to get that funding back? And we really need to, again, focus on the benefits that I just talked about. And you're probably going to have to put some of that down in black and white, right? If I implement this automation project, then I'm going to save this number of FTEs, or I'm going to save this many days or hours out of the process, right? You're really going to have to take some of those benefits that we talked about that maybe are a little squishy and try to put some of them down on paper, because you're going to need that to build the business case. You also need to think about opportunity cost, right? What's the cost of not changing? Because there are some costs there. When you think about some of the risks that manual AP provides for a company or causes a company, they can be quite astonishing. You think about bad 1099 reporting, for example. Every mistake now is $100. That can really add up. When you think about achievement or sales tax audit, a bad audit, the fines and penalties can be huge. Automating AP can mitigate some of that, right? So that's one of the things that you need to think about in terms of not automating, that your exposure to those types of errors that can be quite costly is going to be minimized, right? You need to try to work that into your building the business case, that kind of thing. Already mentioned calculating your ROI, right? You need to think about what the payback period is going to be. How long is it going to take me to get this investment back? And again, if you're talking hosted software as a service, this is much easier because your initial investment is much lower. So your ROI, your payback period is going to be much quicker. You're going to see the benefits much faster. Again, a little bit easier to be approved. But in any event, you really need to think about how long it's going to take you, right? When are you going to see some of the benefits of the money that you're paying out? It's going to be in a month, in a year. Hopefully it's going to be relatively quickly, particularly with hosted. I know when we implemented imaging and workflow in the mid-90s, I figured it was going to take us about 18 months or so to get our initial investment back. I didn't do a very good job. It took us about 9 or 10 months to get it back. Right? So you really need to give some thought to how long it's going to take. And you need to be realistic. You don't want to be overly optimistic or overly pessimistic, but you really need to give some thought there to how long it's going to take, because that's one of the questions that you're going to be asked when you're working for approval. Okay, we've done all of our homework. We've gotten the approval. We've gotten the get-go. We're moving forward. You think you've done a lot of work up to this point. Now the real work begins, right? Because now we have to implement our project. And we need to implement our project successfully because we're hoping that this is one of several or many projects we're going to implement to really automate our AP department. Now, whether you're in an organization that has a project management group or not, you're still going to be heavily involved in the project. If you have a project manager, you're probably going to be training the project manager as to how AP works and working closely with them to make sure that the project is implemented with AP, not to AP. If you don't have a project management department, it's quite likely that as the leader of AP, you're going to be doing the project management, right? Wear two hats all at the same time. So you really need to think about implementation, and you need to think about the team that you're going to work with. And because AP automation affects other departments, you need to think about bringing other people from other departments onto your team. And of course, that's going to depend on what it is you're implementing. If you're implementing ERS, for example, you're definitely going to be working with purchasing and receiving. But if you're working with EDI, right, if that's what you're looking at, you're definitely going to be working with purchasing as well, because EDI or e-invoicing, that's going to involve a change to the vendors, and you're going to need to partner with purchasing to do that kind of thing. You probably wanted to partner as well with somebody from internal audit, right? Because any of these changes are going to be changing all your processes and procedures. And if you're a SOX company, right, you need to involve internal audit from the get-go so that they kind of can help you make sure that you're still going to be complying with the rules and regulations, that kind of thing. Absolutely positively true that the most successful projects begin with communication, right? You need to communicate up front what it is that you want to do. You need to gain buy-in from them. And one of the ways that you do that is ask them some input, right? What would an ideal AP department look like to you in accounting or you in treasury? What are some issues that you've had with AP, right, that we can maybe work out and involve in our automation project and work towards solving those issues, right? Don't kind of know what's really important to them unless you ask them. I think the most important step in any type of a project, once we've got the go-ahead, is defining what the project is, right? You want to make sure that you define what the project is and define what the project isn't. And you need to clearly state what the project is going to be like when it's done, right? When are we finished? When is it done? How will we know when we're done? Because otherwise, things just tend to not get done. So we need to know where we're starting, where we're finishing, and what we're going to be doing along the way. And you need, when you're defining your project, when you're stating the objectives and to think about your timeline, you need to understand that absolutely things are going to go wrong. And you need to build some planning into your project plan for that, right? You need to understand what kind of problems are going to cause a delayed implementation date. And how am I going to determine that? What are we going to do if we're working along and we find out we have a problem like that? How are we going to handle that? Because sometimes those kinds of things happen that are totally unexpected. Despite all the upfront work you did, you come up to a real showstopper. So it's a good idea to plan ahead for something like that happening. Maybe it won't happen to you, and that's great, but still you need to think about that at the beginning, right? You need to do a good project outline, what our current state is, what our future state is, and what kind of steps we're going to be taking to get there, right? What our process is going to be, how we're going to implement this project. If you're working with a project management group, they're going to do a lot of this work with you, hopefully with you, or for you, but you need to really have some input there to make sure that their project plan is realistic. Timeline, really critical. And I always think that when you're thinking about the timeline and you're thinking about the IT side of things, even when they're just working with a hosted group, right, with a third-party vendor, no matter how long they say it's going to take, pretty much needs to double that because it's going to take longer because the IT department has a lot of people wanting things from them and they get interrupted a lot. So always add some time into the timeline for IT. Also need to make sure that you put in plenty of time for testing and training. One of the things that happens is bad things happen and we don't have enough scheduled downtime or problem-solving time built into our schedule is that the amount of time that we're going to spend on testing and training gets shrunken because we don't want to miss that project implementation date, right? And we didn't build in enough kind of cushion days in there in advance. And that's really a mistake. We need to make sure that we allow plenty of time for testing and training because that's going to make the go-live date work so much more smoothly. And I always like to involve my staff in the testing because that's doing some training at the same time. My attitude was always when we're implementing new software is when it's ready to be tested is that I want my group to really pound on that and break it, right? We break something, we're really proud of that fact because A, it really gets them involved, gives them kind of a goal, and it's kind of building into that chain structure that you need to work on, right, all the ways that they really feel like they have a part of it, particularly if they find something that wasn't working very well, and that results in the project working better, right? You're getting that thing fixed as you go forward before the go-live date when it's more painful. Really gains a lot of buy-in there if they're participating in that. And it's just amazing how much they're learning as well as they're doing that testing in addition to formal training. Want to make sure that you're not designing things that you're implementing right. We want to do that ahead of time. Really need to spend time. I can't emphasize enough on developing that project plan. And, as you do that plan, work with your solution providers, right? They're going to have a project implementation plan as well. And you need to kind of work with them to take from what their plan is things that are going to work for you and move forward. And make sure that you're being realistic, right? Work with that third-party provider as well to think about what are some of the problems that we're going to have, right? How are we going to deal with limited resources? Are we going to need to add consultants, those kinds of things? We really need to think about the things that are going to go wrong. If you think I'm being unnecessarily pessimistic here, I'm really not. I'm just trying to really make you think about planning in terms of planning for it to go well, but allowing plenty of time in there in case things don't, because something's going to happen. You really want to avoid also scope creep. You've probably heard of that when the project is kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's why we really want to have a picture up front when we're developing our plan of what the finished project looks like, right? We really want to focus on that. Now, sometimes it's unavoidable because we run into a real showstopper. This is absolutely we're not going to be able to implement unless we do whatever it is that we have to do. And again, that's one of the reasons we want to build some cushion in there so that if you run into a showstopper, you've got the time to develop whatever your workaround is. But you really want to focus on core functionality for the new software that you're putting in place, right? sometimes as you're implementing, as you're learning things, as you're testing, as you're training, you see some other things that would really be beneficial to your process, right? Oh, wow, I can do this. Let's do this. You really need to stifle the impulse to add it to the original project, right? You want to do the basics first, and then look at adding some of that stuff that you've discovered along the way in the next implementation, right? The .2 version or the .3 version. Because the reality is, sometimes you don't even know what a software can do until you're in the middle of implementing it. And I think that's why sometimes spoke creep happens, because you're like, oh, we should do this, or we're kind of going down the wrong path. Well, if you're going down the wrong path, then yes, you may need to change things. But if it's only a sort of wrong path, then maybe you want to go ahead and implement and then change things after you've got the software in place a little bit and you're more familiar with it, right? Add the bells and whistles later. Because one of the things that happens, I think, when we keep making the project grow, is it just doesn't get done, right? Again, really important in our planning stages to make sure we're doing things correctly. And I call this slide recognizing happy mistakes, because we're going to have some mistakes that aren't so happy, but we're going to discover some things along the way by making mistakes that are really good things. And sometimes those things can end up being our best features. Maybe not necessarily in version 1, but in version 2 or 3, right, as we get smarter with the software as we go along. But whether it's a happy mistake or a not so happy mistake, we really need to assess why these things happen, right? Did we have a faulty project plan? Were we just doing things wrong? Did we not communicate? I think a lot of times some of the problems that we have when we're implementing this happens because we didn't communicate properly with our various departments that we're working with or with our solution provider, right? So we really need to work on that. Because hopefully this is the first of several projects that we're going to be doing, and we want to do each successive project to make the implementation run more smoothly. Really important, particularly on that communication side, to make sure that we're meeting regularly, absolutely positively. We want to share progress, right? We want to assess where we are. We want to see where we are in terms of the project plan, and we want to see if we've got any problems and hash out the problems before they get too big. Sometimes what happens is one area is falling behind when the others are doing well, and if we don't get together on a regular basis and see what area is falling behind, then we're not going to be able to redirect the resources that we need to that area so that we can get that area up to speed or resolve whatever that problem is. Talk about having meetings on a regular basis, particularly when you're involved in implementing the project along with all the other work you're going to be doing. People are like, oh my gosh, meetings, death from meetings. Important that we have them. But one of the things I think that makes it work better is if we can figure out who in our group, maybe it's you, maybe it's the project manager, maybe it's someone else, someone may have a particular skill for leading meetings and really getting to the heart of the matter and figuring out what's going on and making sure that they're kept short and sweet and that you're really accomplishing something. If that's the case, then that needs to be your meeting leader, right? You need to have an agenda for these meetings. You need to have some follow-up steps, a to-do list when you leave these meetings so that everybody's communicated the issues and they go forth from the meeting knowing what it is that they're going to do next, right? Really important so that we get something out of these meetings that we have, that we're actually accomplishing something. And again, we need to make sure in our project plan that we've essentially allowed time for things to go wrong or some area to fall behind so that we can meet the schedule. That's really important, particularly considering that this is the first project of many that we want to do. Okay, we've actually finished our project. We've worked our way through the weeds. We've worked our way through the implementation process. We've made our way through the go live date. Things are up and running. Now we need to assess the project, right? We need to figure out, did we accomplish what we wanted to do? Did the project meet our expectations? And if it didn't, why didn't it? Were our expectations incorrect? Did we not really understand what the software is going to do? Did we not really understand how it was going to change our process, right? There's a lot of questions that we can ask and answer when we're assessing our project at its completion point. And it's a good idea to go through this process. I know I work with the project management team, and at the end of every project, we had essentially an assessment meeting or a debriefing session, which is essentially this. Let's review the steps of the project. Let's go through our implementation plan. Let's go through our project plan. How did we do? Is the end user, is the IT department happy with the project, or at least content with the project? Or do we have some real issues that we need to address in terms of what we delivered or how we delivered it? We need to measure our success, right? We were keeping statistics before we did the project. Now we need to keep statistics after we did the project to see if it really helped us automate and achieve our goals in terms of increased efficiency and lower cost. And that way we can help determine what it is that we're going to do next. Have time for questions now. I think Jason's going to help us moderate the questions. Again, if you haven't thought of anything now, but you think of something later, this is my contact information. You can also contact me here for a copy of the slide deck if you'd like to have that. I answer this email essentially every day. We'll be happy to provide information about this slide deck or other AP information that you might want to ask me as well. If I can't answer it, I'll get you to the right people who can. Jason, hand it back over to you.
All right, great stuff, Pam. And yeah, we really would like to hear from you in the audience, either your questions or even some of your experiences in the in working with AP, taking on projects related to AP automation. We'd love to hear how that's gone for you or what you're thinking about in that realm. Pam, one question I had just to get things started. One of the things I tend to hear in the dynamic space quite a bit is that, you know, a lot of the consulting that Dynamics ERP product customers get tends to be with Microsoft partners, and that a lot of them are not experts in AP automation projects specifically. What's your experience in terms of, or maybe what might your recommendations be in terms of finding consultants to participate in AP automation projects? Is it how important is it to bring in a specialist in your view who really does AP related projects a lot?
I think it's really beneficial if you can find someone, because if not, you're really doing a lot of training up front, and that may be what you need to do is train the consultant in AP. But certainly experience they've had is beneficial. It can be really hard, I think, for outsiders to understand AP. I think it can be really difficult for people who have a technological mindset to understand AP because it's so different in terms of nuts and bolts and that kind of thing. I always ask, you know, what the experience is, where they've been, what they've done, who they've worked with. But if you're going to have to work with someone who doesn't have the experience, you're probably going to want to sit them down for some time up front and explain to them the things that are important to you, the pain points, you know, what you're really after, that kind of thing, so that they have a bit of understanding. Big problem. But, you know, even when you get somebody who has a lot of AP experience implementing projects, they may have worked with AP departments that do things so totally different from you that it still requires a lot of training up front.
All right. One of the other questions that that kind of does tend to come up a bit, you know, one of the benefits of AP automation is, you know, a lot less manual work on these specific tasks. What are some of the good uses for some of the people who you can transition off of that work onto other things? Is it more analytics, or what other kinds of higher value work do people end up being able to do?
Lots of things there. You know, a lot of things that we want to do in AP, we just never get done. They're on the to-do list or they're in the in-basket, but we never get to them. Spend analysis, providing information in terms of what we're buying, who we're buying it from, those kinds of things. Better management of our vendor master file. Our surveys show that about 75% of organizations AP owns the vendor file, but our vendor files are often not in very good shape. And a good vendor file can help us prevent duplicate payments, can make sure that we're responding properly to our regulations in terms of 1099, sales and use taxes, achievement, those kinds of things. Really provide a lot of opportunity to work on that vendor file and get it in good shape. Vendor management, dealing with the vendors. So much time we spend in AP when it's manually based, putting out fires, that we really don't have an opportunity to be proactive with our vendors. Give us the opportunity to really manage our vendors and help essentially work with the purchasing group to establish that relationship better. I've also talked to some AP departments who start working much more closely with purchasing and maybe doing some of the nuts and bolts of turning that requisition into a purchase order so that the match process works more smoothly, those types of things. Implementing P-card programs, monitoring P-card programs. I think a lot of it is analytical, but a lot of it is also in terms of relationship management with vendors, purchasing, receiving, those kinds of stuff. Once you start looking at all the things that you're not getting done, those are the areas where you can really start focusing those people. And it's actually amazing how well some of those people respond when you move them off of doing data entry to working with the vendors or working on the 1099s or the vendor files, those kinds of things.
All right, yeah, I can certainly imagine. Why don't I make a final call for questions here, and while we see if anything else comes in, I'm going to just remind everyone that we do have a quick survey that we ask you to fill out as the session ends, as you depart. We really appreciate your feedback there on how the session went for you, and we definitely review that information. Okay, well, I think we are at the end of our question queue. So Pam, let me just start by saying thanks to you for taking the time to present to us today. I really appreciate all your expertise that you shared today.
Appreciate the opportunity, and like I said to the attendees, please feel free to contact me for the slide deck or any other information that you might need.
All right, and thanks to everyone on the line for attending. We appreciate you being here with us, and we appreciate your feedback as well. So thanks, and have a great day.